Before starting this video, I want to promote the overlooked 1918 and 1941 Discord. It's a Discord for discussing the armies and conflicts of the world from 1918 to 1941. We have nearly 100 photos of just the Baltic armies before 1940, so if you're interested and want to see the progress of future videos, go check out the pinned comment. Welcome back to the final part of the Baltic series. If you haven't seen the other parts, go check them out now, but today we talk about Lithuania. Lithuania is the biggest and most populous out of all the Baltic states. It's famous in history for its commonwealth with Poland, but after that, I think its history is little known. So I hope this video can shine some light on it. So today, let's talk about the tanks, planes, and other armored vehicles of Lithuania. On February 16, 1918, a council of 20 men declared the independence of Lithuania. After a few months of debating what the next government should be and waiting for the Germans to leave, on November 2, 1918, Lithuania became fully independent. Like everywhere else in Eastern Europe at the time, what followed was a complete mess, and so Lithuania fought two main wars of independence. One against the Bolsheviks, this lasted until August 31, 1919, and one against the Polish for the city of Vilnius, which went from August to November 30, 1920. After these troubles, we can now start the history of the Lithuanian tank force. The Lithuanians would not receive any tanks for the first 4 years of independence. This would be due to financial problems. So we skip to 1920, where they ordered 12 Renault FTs from France. These would not have a cannon, however. Instead, the Lithuanians put in MG08 and Maxim machine guns. And by 1934, all of these would become training vehicles due to rusting. Back to the 1920s, on January 1st, 1924, the armored unit was founded, and this would be the only force centered around armor in Lithuania. We will come back to the organization of this regiment later. 2 years later, on December 17, 1926, the Nationalist Union, led by former President Antanas, launched a coup with support from the military. The coup was successful. The only people killed were 4 communist leaders, and with that, Smetona became the leader of Lithuania for the next 14 years. Skipping another 2 years to October 6, 1928, the Ministry of Defense started a commission to look for new armored vehicles. They toured around Europe and found 9 possible candidates. But then the Great Depression occurred, and so Lithuania was not able to afford any tanks. But once the economy recovered in 1933, they focused on 2 main tanks, the British Vickers 4-ton and the Italian CV-33 tankette. The commission actually thought the CV-33 was superior, and thankfully for the Lithuanian army, the Vickers 4-ton was cheaper, so they went ahead with buying the Vickers 4-tons. On December 9, 1933, once finally able to afford the tanks, they bought 16 Vickers 4-tons from the British. These would be armed with a 7.92mm machine gun, and they would arrive in February 1935. Seeing the usefulness in them, the Lithuanian High Command wanted more tanks. Originally, there was some discussion of buying heavier tanks, specifically the Swedish Landsverk L60 and the Hungarian Strasser prototype. But these plans fell through, so the High Command looked into buying another 16 light tanks. And they actually looked into buying a company of even lighter tanks, which most likely would have been the CV-33 tankettes. Luckily, the plans of a company of CV-33s were dropped, and so they agreed on buying 16 more Vickers 4-tons. The tanks were ordered on May 2, 1936, and would arrive in 1937. 2 years later, in March 1939, the Germans would force the Lithuanians to give back the region of Memel, which was taken in 1923. And 6 months later, on September 17, 1939, the Soviets would invade Poland. The next day, they would occupy the contentious former capital city of Vilnius. A secret agreement would be signed a month later on October 10th, which I will talk about more later. It allowed the Lithuanians to take back the city, and so on October 27th, the Lithuanian army would occupy the city. And this would be the last Lithuanian military operation before invasion the next year. And so that concludes the story of the Lithuanian tanks. But that's not all for Lithuanian armored vehicles. In 1933, the Lithuanians would order 6 Landsverk L181s. These would be the only Lithuanian armored vehicles with a cannon on them. They possessed a 20mm cannon and 2 Maxim machine guns, and they would arrive in 1934. For other armored vehicles, the Lithuanians had 6 armored cars. All would be seeing service in the War of Independence. One of them would be captured during the German reoccupation of Memel in March 1939. Lastly, for armored trains, Lithuania would have the least amount of armored trains, only possessing 4. The first Lithuanian armored train would actually be captured by the Polish on October 3rd, 1920. Lithuania would later make 3 more armored trains and eventually would be put out of service along with the entire train regiment in 1935 due to the high command seeing armored trains as obsolete. So what happened to all these armored vehicles? Well, like Latvia and Estonia, they were all scrapped. Pretty much everything would be scrapped except for the Vickers, which would be used in the early stages of Barbarossa and were presumably destroyed by the Germans. Before continuing on, I want to highlight the story of the failed Lithuanian-Czechoslovak tank deal. So this story starts on December 28, 1935, when the Lithuanians were looking to buy more tanks. So the Lithuanian High Command would send a letter to the Czechoslovakian tank company, Českomoravsko Komendaniki, which I'm going to just refer to as the CKD for the rest of the video. The request was for a 5-ton tank with an armor thickness of at least 6 millimeters and a maximum speed of 50 kilometers an hour. They needed 4 of them with machine guns and 12 of them with 20mm cannons. The next month, the CKD responded by offering the AH-4 light tank, which met every requirement. But the Lithuanians turned it down due to choosing the Vickers 4 tons instead. But later that year in November 1936, they would come back to the CKD. They asked the CKD for a 9-ton tank, and in turn the CKD would show the TNH light tank. The Lithuanians denied this, saying 9 tons would be too heavy for Lithuanian bridges. This makes you wonder, why would they even order this in the first place if they knew this to be the case? Anyways, the Lithuanians would change their order to being 5 to 6 tons in weight, and so the CKD would design a new tank called the LTL specifically for Lithuanian use. And so the Lithuanian government signed a deal with the CKD for 21 of them. In May 1938, the tank was fully made and the Lithuanians observed its first test. More tests would be carried out through 1938, and from January to March 1939, the tank was sent to test in Lithuania. The Lithuanians would send it back to finalize the designs, and it was fully finished in August 1940. But by then, Lithuania didn't really exist, so after a huge waste of time, they were instead bought and shipped to Switzerland. And a little side note, the USSR actually attempted to look for these. They somehow thought it was in the country. They didn't turn up anything, and it just turned out to be an even bigger waste of time. Alright, so with all of this out of the way, let's get into the organization of the Lithuanian tanks. Lithuania in 1939 had 12 Renault FTs, 32 Vickers 4 tons, 6 Landsverk L181s, 5 armored cars, and 3 armored trains. The armored unit would be split into 4 companies. The first tank company, which would be stationed in Radviliškis, which comprises the 12 Renault STs. It is to be noted these would be barely operational by 1938. The second tank company, stationed in Kaunas, which comprises the first batch of the 16 Vickers 4 tons, and the third tank company, which was stationed in Tauragė, which comprises the second batch of 16 Vickers 4 tons. And lastly, there was the first armored car company, which comprises the 6 Landsverk L181s, which were stationed across the 3 other places mentioned. The history of the Lithuanian Air Force starts on February 5th, 1919, when a Sopwith Shuttle was captured from the Bolsheviks after the Battle of Yzno. 3 weeks later, the Lithuanian Army would buy 8 LVG-6s from Germany. These would arrive on February 27th, 1919. March would see the first flights into combat, though these would only be for reconnaissance. And officially, on March 12th, 1919, the Lithuanian Air Force would be born, as it would be separate from the engineering battalion. A month later, on April 4th, 2 Lithuanian pilots would do a reconnaissance flight when they were forced to land by the Bolsheviks. Both pilots would survive, but it was the first time a Lithuanian plane was nearly shot down. And finally, on May 2nd, 1919, the first bombing by Lithuanian pilots would occur when 5 planes bombed Bolshevik trenches around Ukmergė. The Lithuanian Air Force would carry out 5 more bombings against the Bolsheviks and would continue to do more reconnaissance missions. When the war against Poland officially began in late September 1920, the Lithuanian planes carried out bombings. During one of these bombing missions on October 4th, 1920, the first Lithuanian plane would be shot down, which would kill the pilot, and another plane would be shot down 2 weeks later. Overall, Lithuania would do 93 missions during this short war, only a handful being bombing missions. The wars for independence would end on November 30th, and the next year, the restructuring of the Air Force would happen. Throughout the 1920s, the most common aircraft was actually a handful of different types. They would mostly all just be German planes bought by Lithuania after World War I. Before going into the most common aircraft of the 1930s, we must meet Antanas Gustaitis. Antanas was born in 1898 in a village west of Daugavpils. In 1919, he would join the Lithuanian Air Force, and in the next year, he would fight against the Polish, during which he nearly died because he overloaded his plane with bombs and then he crashed, but of course the bombs didn't go off luckily. After the war, he started developing his own planes. His first plane was the ANBO-1, which was made in 1925. It was never accepted into use, but it showed his genius. That same year, he would go to France to study airplane design, and he would develop a few more aircraft in the late 20s. His first successful aircraft was the ANBO-4 in 1932. The military would produce 14 of them. He would later develop and make more models, including the ANBO-8, which was actually an advanced light bomber. In total, 66 ANBO series planes would be produced from 1925 to 1939. These planes were so good, both the Germans and Soviets would use them. Outside of the ANBO series, the most commonly bought aircraft of the 30s was the French Directine D500 and the British Gloucester Gladiator. Lastly, 12 Marine Saulnier MS-406 French fighters were supposed to be sent to Lithuania. They were so close to being sent that they were packaged and waiting for a boat, but as World War II started, the order was cancelled. On October 10th, 1939, following the examples of the other two Baltic states, Lithuania was forced into a deal with the Soviet Union. They would have to allow Soviet troops in Lithuanian bases. But unlike Latvia and Estonia, this was actually beneficial to Lithuania, as they would get a chunk of land that included their historical capital, Vilnius. The next year, on June 11, 1940, the Soviet border guards would harass and accidentally shoot Lithuanian border guards and policemen. Fed up with nothing happening, on June 14th, the Soviets gave an ultimatum to Lithuania, saying a new pro-Soviet government to be formed and allow thousands of more Soviet troops in the country. After some debate, President Antanas Smetona agreed to the ultimatum and then fled the country. The Soviets peacefully invaded the next day, on June 15, 1940. All aircraft upon the Soviet takeover on June 15th would be pressed into service in World War II or scrapped. And with the history out of the way, let's get into the organization of the Lithuanian Air Force. In 1939, Lithuania had a total of 108 aircraft. This can be broken into 33 fighters, 48 reconnaissance planes, and 25 trainer aircrafts. The Air Force was divided into 3 fighter squadrons. These would be the 1st, 5th, and 7th. And then there were 3 reconnaissance squadrons. These would be the 2nd, 7th, and 8th. And lastly, there were 2 bomber squadrons, and these would be the 4th and the 3rd. Finally, in total, there were about 1,500 men in the Air Force in 1939, which is bigger than both Estonia and Latvia combined. In conclusion, Lithuania had the fundamentals for successful defense. They had the biggest armored force in the Baltics in 1939 and were constantly modernizing their army. Unfortunately, they were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. They made enemies with all of their neighbors except for Latvia, and so I don't think there was much of a chance of holding out. What could have been done differently? As said twice before, not much would have been able to stop the Soviets. But honestly, I think if the Lithuanians didn't care much about Vilnius and realized a Soviet invasion was incoming, at the rate they were going, they may have been able to slow the Soviets. For reference, they had about the same amount of tanks and planes as Finland, and of course Finland had the winter advantage in the Winter War, but depending on the level of defenses, who knows what could have happened. And that is the Baltic series. I want to say before going on with this outro that one day I will return to the Baltics, but not for a while as I'm getting pretty burnt out. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, leave a like and bell. If you have any recommendations for videos, leave it in the comments, and goodbye.